Welcome to History Unrevealed, where archaeologists are beginning to dig preliminary trenches at a location known as Hill close to the Belgian village of Wyche 8. It was the location of savage battling in the Second Great War without a doubt. This real estate parcel on the Messiaen's edge changed hands no less than multiple times during that contention. But during World War I, this rural Lidl became a bloody battlefield where British, French, and German invaders engaged in fierce combat. The Germans had cleaned out English and French protectors off of their situations around Wyche 8. Without a doubt, German powers prevailed with regards to holding on to the length of the Messiaen's edge, a decisively significant level that directed the encompassing Flanders farmlands. After the Second Great War finished in the Butcher and Flanders, was not anymore the combat zones around which shade were lowered by soil. As the years went by, what had occurred at the slope at site somewhere in the range of 1914 and 1918 was entrusted to the past, lost in the fogs of time. However, at that point, very nearly 100 years after the fact, engineers gained a real estate parcel close to wedge formed, determined to fabricate new lodging there. Despite the fact that their planned construction site was on a hill at that point, Belgian regulations regarding construction projects and archaeology came into play. An archaeological survey of the proposed area is required by the developer whenever a new construction project is planned. Jim was brought in to conduct a preliminary survey of the hill at the location. What he and his team discovered during the initial investigation in 2015 was astonishment. They dug shallow preliminary trenches to determine what might be beneath the Flanders turf. It immediately became evident that they were at the site of a significant, the Second Great War German protective situation on slope at, and taking into account it was exceptionally old, the arrangement of channels and dugouts seemed to be incredibly very much saved. Jim wanted to see this site properly excavated, so if he somehow happened to accomplish his point of a full unearthing, where was the cash to come from verta? Jim subsequently went to see one of the designers addressing the German Telecaster Deutsche Welle in July 2018. Verta. Jim recollected his gathering. I requested that he give me additional opportunity to check whether I could find arrangements, he reviewed. Crowdfunding was used by a wide range of businesses to raise money. If a World War I archaeological dig wanted to raise money in the same way, why not? So battlefield expert Peter Doyle and German researcher Robin Schaffer, along with verta Jim, created a Kickstarter page. The page stated, "We plan to excavate the site and expose the battlefield in order to increase our understanding of the trench war and of the men who fought there before the site is lost to housing development. With your support, we plan to excavate the site and expose the battlefield. In any case, would individuals truly approach with assets to uncover the slope at site? Tragically, this special front line stays a practical objective for lodging, and there's no time left to save it," he composed. This site's significance and singular character necessitate a full-scale excavation. No substitutions should be made. Dan Snow is a profoundly regarded television history specialist, and Al Murray is a famous comic who ends up having a set of experiences degree from Oxford College, and both loaned their help to the outer. In fact, the appeal had raised more than $200,000, exceeding its goal of approximately $160,000. Nearly 3,000 people had contributed in the form of small and large pledges. Additionally, the appeal had raised funds in other ways, such as by offering opportunities to be an archaeologist at Hillad and by selling t-shirts. So the slope promotion site was saved, and the venture could go on, which it without a doubt did in April 2018. What was most likely the first crowdfunding appeal for a paleohistory project had been an extraordinary achievement, and presently will investigate exhaustively what the exhuming uncovered, including some stunning proof of the butcher of close-quarters conflict. However, first we should figure out more about what really occurred at the sharply challenged slope during the Second Great War, prior to 1914, when the horrors of World War I began. To be sure, a wooden fabricated factory remained there. However, that was all to change when the English and French laid out guarded positions along the Messiaen's ridge. The Germans went after from October 20, 1914. German troops defeated the British and French after a few days of fierce fighting, securing the Messiaen's ridge, including the position of Helladit, which shaped much of the defense around the assistance of British soldiers known as the White Sheet that had fallen to the 1st London Scottish Regiment that had just advanced to the front. On 31 October, the main London Scottish was shipped off, helped the 4th Mounted Force Detachment, which was hanging tight around, which helped the Scots set up on the level of the edge under weighty fire. They hung on against rehashed German assaults as the night progressed, yet in the end, after close quarter battle, they were driven once again at the expense of approximately 400 dead and injured. The Germans currently held the essential levels of the untidiness, unbending wedge molded, which managed the cost of them, continuous perspectives across adversary lines. Sappers burrowed their way down approximately 100 feet below the surface through the clay of Flanders all the way to the German positions. Under the German defensive positions were 26 mines. On May 21, 1917, the artillery launched a massive assault on the German positions after finishing all of the preparations below ground. The combined forces had destroyed the Germans with more than 2,000 guns and 300 heavy mortars by the time the British infantry attack began on June 7. In his 1921 book, The Press and the General Staff, Neville Lydon cited the expressions of one of the commandants of the assault on Messiaen's overall. Sir Charles Harrington noticed, "Respectable man. I don't know whether we will leave a mark on the world tomorrow. However, in any event, we'll change geology." He was alluding to the reasonable effect of the explosives underneath the German lines. 19 of the massive mines were detonated by engineers at 3:10 a.m., 20 minutes after the end of the artillery barrage. At the point when those mines exploded, the blast was likely the greatest the world had at any point seen. As a matter of fact, there were even reports that it was perceptible in the Irish city of Dublin. A detailed 10,000 Germans kicked the bucket because of the overwhelming power of the mines that detonated underneath them. Ground troops presently assault the leftovers of the paralyzed German powers, and more gunnery shells, as well as toxic substance gas shots downpour down on the German channels just a little ways off of the propelling English and pioneer infantrymen. The sustained German situation at Wedge formed, which path close to the focal point of the line of assault, had been seriously harmed by the ordnance siege that went before the infantry attack. The attack on the Messiaen's edge was an incredible achievement to the German forces that had been in control of them for nearly 3 years. Notwithstanding, the Germans mounted a counter-assault the day after the English capture of the Messiaen's ridge. As a matter of fact, despite the fact that they were effectively opposed, more modest German Sardis went on until the center of June, yet failed miserably. The time had come to count up the setbacks on each side. Unusual for an attack during World War I, the Germans lost about 25,000 men, making them the aggressors. The British were able to retake the village for the last time in September, and this time they received assistance from American soldiers. At that point, the end of World War I was only a few weeks away. In fact, Simon Verta Jim had made this clear on the project website's Hope Hill. Jim explained that archaeology was necessary for a site that was at risk of development because of its uniqueness and extraordinary preservation of its buried archaeological relics. However, preliminary research revealed the site's unusual significance. In point of fact, the site has been referred to as Pompeii Hill AD during the First World War, and archaeologists soon discovered that it contains a complex collection of trenches. Furthermore, this mirrored the way that the site, which covers almost 3 sections of land, had changed hands so often, and one variable specifically contributed incredibly to the site's unprecedented degree of conservation. Area hadn't at any point been put under the furrows since the Second Great War finished up in 1918, on the grounds that various protectors and aggressors had involved the site so often during the Second Great War. Some trenches had clearly belonged to the Germans, but others were hard to tell apart. A number seemed to have been dug by the French, likely in 1914, at the hour of the principal fight at Slope, at when the Germans held onto it. The presence of French small arms, munitions, and other artifacts that emerged from Flanders clay when the researchers carefully dug into it, including a blue enamel water bottle that was given to British Commonwealth soldiers and an ammunition pouch, provided the most compelling evidence for this. However, more disturbing evidence of the events that took place at Hill during World War I began to emerge as well. Both German and English human remaining parts before long started to arise. In every excavation campaign, Jim wrote, "You know that it can happen, but every time it does, it knocks you off your feet for a few seconds before you switch back to work mode and make sure you do it right because every detail counts." Finding human remains on battlefields during the First World War is something you never get used to. The more data you accumulate, the greater the opportunity that the man lying there can have a name again verta Jim made sense of. Tragically, much of the time, this is a waste of time. In such circumstances, the most you can achieve is guaranteeing that he gets a legitimate entombment. Some of these soldiers were laid to rest with a full military ceremony at 11 a.m., more than 100 years after they died in the mud of Flanders. On that autumn day, a large number of mourners watched as 13 British and Commonwealth troops were led to the wedge-shaped military cemetery. One of the final resting places covered with England's association banner contained the remaining parts of an obscure English fighter. Another casket held the remaining parts of a fighter whose ethnicity stays obscure. 11 British and CA Commonwealth soldiers' scant remains were contained in the final coffin. These men, it's accepted, likely passed on towards the end of the Second Great War. At the point when the final resting places had been brought down into the graves of Bugler sounded the last post. The day after the English memorial services, 73 Germans were given entombments in another graveyard. Addressing English paper, the watchman upon the arrival of the English interments, Simon verta Jim expressed a portion of the remaining parts were simply dispersed bones under a couple creeps of ground. As we arrive at the last casings of the present video, we need to stretch out our sincere thanks to all of you for going along with us on this experience. Your time and consideration are genuinely valued. In the event that you appreciated what you saw, remember to show some affection by enjoying, remarking, and buying in. We sincerely appreciate your support. Keep looking, keep being curious, and most importantly, thank you for watching until our next meeting.